Yes.
Okay, then here we go then. So now we're going to do... Oh. I tell you what then, before we start that, let's sort this out. We're going to do a little bonus thing. We're really doing this just to test out this camera and this phone to see how things are working, which is not very successfully so far, according to what's been going on thus far this evening. But here are my magic cards, and there's my magic timer. So, you and I are going to... What have I done here? You and I are going to randomly pick 6 of these each. Try and pick them from different places in the pack, because I think it's not shuffled brilliantly. Should we do that before we start this thing?
Okay.
Right, you and I are each going to pick 6 cards randomly from the pack before we start that thing, and then you'll find out what we're going to do with them when we do start that thing. You got 6?
Yes.
I got 6 too. So, right, I shall start the recorder. This is really interesting so far, isn't it? And we'll go. There we are. We are strangers in space, and for the next 15 minutes, we're going to be talking about Doctor Who, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hi, I'm Matt.
And we're just going to do a little short bonus podcast in which, because there are only 2 of us, so we can't play one of our usual games that we like to play, which are really set up for 3 or 4 people, we're just going to go on the spot each. So we have a timer. We each have 6 cards, randomly selected, on which are the names of 6 Doctor Who stories, or stories with a Doctor Who in them.
Okay.
And we're going to alternate and turn over the cards one at a time and talk for precisely 58.5 seconds, or whatever it was I worked out that this timer comes to.
Okay.
And then we'll call it a day. You want to go first or second?
I don't mind, I can go first if you like.
Okay, you go first. Turn over your card, and you've got 58 seconds on
Ambassadors of Death. This is that story from season 7 that always came bottom of my own personal rankings, but it's slowly matured as I've gotten older and I've watched it a few more times. It's the only story out of those 3 in season 7 that doesn't obviously split itself into two halves. It kind of moves from one tone to another, and then it has an amazing kind of space sequence with John Pertwee gurning all the way up. It's really out there. It's really earthbound in the sense that it's got this conspiracy, it's got the military, and it looks really good. So it's the one I'd probably go back to first in season 7.
Wow. It's got that really terminal opening sequence where you're just sitting looking at the guy in a chair for about 3 minutes.
I love that.
Really?
It's really tense, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I dig that.
All right, my first one is The Invasion. What's The Invasion?
It's the same as Ambassadors of Death.
Well, yeah, but it's... Okay, my story of The Invasion is that was the Cyberman story from the 60s that never got novelised.
Right, okay.
And I suppose that's true for The Wheel in Space too. So when I was growing up, because I had the Target books, like when I was 7 or 8 or whatever it was, 8.
Yeah.
And so the ones that I would read over and over and over again would be the Cybermen and Tomb of the Cybermen, because I just found those 2 stories really, really exciting. And because The Invasion and The Wheel in Space hadn't been novelised, so they just seemed like they'd be really dull Cyberman stories to me, because if they weren't really dull Cyberman stories, why wouldn't they have novelised them?
Right.
They'd have novelised them too, right?
Right.
So when I finally got to see The Invasion, I think I suffered a bit from expecting it to be really dull.
Yes.
And being so much older by this point, it doesn't still have the appeal that it would have had when you were a child.
Okay.
So I don't find The Invasion excites me quite as much as it probably would and should do.
Okay.
Your next one is?
Nightmare in Silver.
Oh, we've got a thing going on here, haven't we?
So much promise. The trailers showed that kind of new style Quicksilver Cyberman, which was really interesting. I've always been a little bit ambivalent about Cybermen anyway, but the new series Cybermen, the clumpy, the idea of steel, it never really latched onto me. So I approached this thinking maybe this is going to be. I approached this in the same way I approach every Cyberman story. Maybe this will be the Cyberman story where the Cybermen are actually frightening. But I've kind of been thinking that since I saw Tomb of the Cybermen back in whenever it was, 1997. So it's never quite panned out, and it didn't quite pan out. But I've always been tempted to go back and watch it again, see what it's like.
Yeah. Okay. And my next one is the Space Museum.
Oh, wow.
Okay, there's a fallacy about the Space Museum
Yeah.
in that it tells a time paradox story, a temporal paradox story. People will often lump the Space Museum in with Day of the Daleks and Blink and so on, and City of Death, and say, well, it's a temporal paradox story, isn't it? Because they land, they see themselves in the future in these, basically boiled in amber, and they need to stop that from happening. But the trouble with the Space Museum is, even though there was plenty of science fiction around and had been for years which addressed these kind of issues, I'm sure, the writer of the Space Museum, having set this interesting story up, then never addresses it again. It's never addressed at the end of the story whether they actually rescued themselves from going into those cases, from dying. It doesn't happen. Therefore, it wasn't going to happen. But there's never a point in the story at which they rescue themselves, and I think that's a terrible decision.
I kind of liked it even after that bit. I thought it got quite. I was surprised. I saw it a few months ago for the first time, because there were some Doctor Who stories I've just been sat on, so I can watch them for the first time, and that was one. And actually, it was better than I thought it was going to be.
The first episode's quite good, and the rest of it's moderately fun if you're in the right mood for it. So it's not awful. I don't think it was a very good story.
Evil of the Daleks. So for ages, Evil of the Daleks was my favourite ever Doctor Who story, even though I've never seen it. I had the audio tape with Tom Baker narrating it. Back when the audio version was very difficult to hear. So before it had been cleaned up, it was really crackly. I remember walking to school at the time, desperately trying to listen on my Walkman to every sort of detail. And that kind of focus really concentrated myself into the story. And then I got the John Peel novelisation. And for me, those John Peel target books, the two Daleks Master Plan books, Evil of the Daleks and Power of the Daleks, they are the best John Peel ever wrote. In terms of fiction, they're really gripping stories, and Evil of Daleks. I mean, that balance really works for me.
I quite liked his first. It's the only one I've read, because I've not read many of the New Adventures, but I rather liked his Mesopotamia one.
It's okay.
I quite liked it.
Well, but
anyway, on to my next one, which is Arc of Infinity. Okay, so when Arc of Infinity was first on, I thought it was awful. And I thought, why have they gone to Amsterdam when really they're just running around a street? They could probably have done this in Humberside or somewhere. There was nothing particularly about it that said Amsterdam to me. And they brought Omega back, and I just thought, well, if you're going to bring Omega back, then you have to do something spectacular with him. And they didn't do something spectacular with him. Apart from that weird thing towards the end of the fourth episode where the Doctor is Omega, or Omega is the Doctor. Which it seemed to me, if you were going to do that, then why throw it away for a few minutes at the end of an episode when really that should have been a whole episode or half the story. That should have been what it's about. That should have been the focus of your story. So I hated Arc of Infinity when it was first on, just because I couldn't understand it, and I still don't understand it.
And you're running out of time for the butt.
But having rewatched it recently, I rather enjoyed it more than I expected to, because I think Johnny Byrne's a decent writer, and actually the dialogue and the characters kept me going.
Okay. I've got Christmas Invasion, which adds at the time I wasn't blown away by. I think at the time, a new Doctor, I was very excited to see David Tennant, but we were back in Christopher Eccleston land. We were back on Earth. We were back in a very similar story to what we'd had in the previous season. I kind of wanted, I think at that point in the series, even though it was very excited to have come back, I wanted it to sort of take off and go to places I'd never seen before. So I kind of felt a little bit grounded. I was sort of in two minds about the Sycorax. There were some striking scenes in it. And David Tennant kind of hit the ground running for me. But I had to watch it a few times to really get the most out of it, I think.
Yeah. I gotta say, I really enjoyed it at first, but as the years have gone on, I like it less and less. So I'm deep. Anyway, my next one is The Girl Who Waited, which I didn't enjoy Series 5 much, because I thought Stephen Moffat was doing too much of Russell T Davies, and it just felt to me like he was reining himself in. And then we got to Series 6, and I started re-falling in love with it all over again. And The Girl Who Waited, when that came along, ostensibly from the guy who'd written Rise of the Cybermen, so I wasn't expecting much.
Yeah.
Although subsequently it seems to have turned out that there was a fair bit of rewriting from Russell T Davies on Rise of the Cybermen. So I wasn't expecting a great deal from The Girl Who Waited, especially as there's no guest cast to speak of. A couple of voiceovers maybe. And for me, I think when there's not much of a guest cast to speak of, until I've seen the thing and see how it works, there's always a block in my mind. This isn't going to work. This is going to be really dull.
Yeah.
So, but when I actually got to see The Girl Who Waited, my God, it blew me away.
Okay. I've got The Aztecs. It's one of those Hartnell stories I probably would have resisted watching for quite a long time, because when the video started coming out, I was of the age to favour the Daleks and the science fiction ones, and obviously all the Tom Baker ones. So I probably sat on the Aztecs for a while. And then at some point, I think I just clicked with the historical stories, and I recognise them less as sort of adventure stories and more as kind of television archaeology. Really interesting to see how they recreate this period, see what this period means in the 1960s when they're creating it. And then gradually I got into the story and the humour. I think the relationships between the main characters, they had such chemistry together that it kind of transcended the subject matter.
My next one is The Girl Who Died.
Wow.
So I had The Girl Who Waited, now I've got The Girl Who Died.
Tragic arc, isn't it?
Well, and this is just The Girl Who Died, the episode, because it stands apart from the episode that follows, in terms of being written by somebody else, apart from anything else. I wasn't really sure what to expect of this, because you were having this season that was kind of presenting itself as being two-parters, but it was said during the pre-publicity that sometimes the two-parters wouldn't be as connected as just being one story spread over 2 episodes. And this one felt like it wasn't going to be substantial. But I think the moment the Doctor and Clara get split up and she gets transported up to the spaceship and he gets left behind, I started to click with what the episode was. And actually, going back and watching this a second time the next day or whatever, I really, really enjoyed this one. It does that thing that I really like, where it isolates you to a place but gives you a sense of the place. Okay. Your final one, Matt.
My final one is Castrovalva.
Lucky you!
I remember this from when, this is one of the few that I remember from when it was broadcast. I was young enough to be absolutely devastatingly excited by this, so I remember Logopolis. I must have seen some of the repeats in the interim period. So Castrovalva, I was on board for it as a kid. And also probably because it wasn't that scary. It was a Doctor Who story I think at that age, you're waiting for the scary thing to happen, but you're secretly relieved when a scary thing doesn't happen because it means you don't have to go out the room or hide your face, so you can watch the whole thing. And yeah, it's not child friendly in terms of it's quite slow paced, but seeing the inside of a TARDIS with such sort of loving detail and for so long, that's just something that I really treasured as a kid.
All right, now my last one, and this is the Silurians. So right next to the Ambassadors of Death. This is a story that should be really dull, because let's face it, it's mainly 7 episodes set in a really not very interesting set. It's really not very interesting studio set. And it kind of tells a story that doesn't and shouldn't really develop much, because it's basically just one idea. These people have woken up, they want their planet back. So it's basically a fight between them and the people who've come across them. So it really shouldn't be very interesting. I don't know whether my appreciation of this was informed by the fact that the Target book is just so readable, and was another one I read over and over and over again. But I also think there's something in the direction. It's okay, it's a Malcolm Holt script, it's a decent script, but the director brings it to life in ways that you wouldn't foresee in a television programme.
Oh.
Making much more of it than it really deserves to be.
Very good.
So there you are. We've had 6 choices each. We've made a little extra podcast for people to enjoy. Let's hope they enjoy it. Next time you hear from us, it'll probably be something a bit longer and a bit more substantial.
Lee.
Well, yeah. Lee is more substantial and Simon's longer, or the other way around? Don't like to think about it. But next time there'll probably be more of us, so we'll be able to do something a bit bigger. But until then...
Like Lee.
Oh no, I don't want to talk about doing Lee. Until then, I was JR.
And I was Matt.
And we'll speak again soon. And if anybody is watching over there, it works. That's goodbye from us to you too.